Dober večer. Zopet se oglašamo iz Evropskega parlamenta. Kot smo napovedali že v napovedniku in v prejšnjem sklopu teh javljanj, imam sedaj v studiu svetovalca uradnega govorca za Evropski parlament, gospoda Florent Montagnerja.
Good evening.
Dober večer.
Good evening.
Just to recap in English for our English-speaking viewers, we are going to continue the set of interviews now with the advisor to the European Parliament spokesperson, Mr. Florent Montagner. And we are going to talk, I would like to talk with you, if you don't mind, about the elections, about the campaign preparations, the expectations perhaps, plan A, plan B, and this sort of things that we all like to listen to. Yes, so perhaps with the first question, there is a change of the electoral system according to the Lisbon strategy. There was already a Lisbon treaty.
Yes, indeed. We have European elections this year at the end of May,
Yes.
like every 5 years. But still, this year will be pretty different to what we used to have in the past, in previous elections. And this is due to several changes. On one hand, in the system we have, on the other hand, in the context in which these elections will take place. And I think we can really see three big differences compared to 2009, 2004, and even before. The first one is that for the first time, the elections will have a direct impact on the election, on the choice of the President of the Commission. So the President of the Commission is the head of the EU executive. He was so far chosen by the heads of states and governments. Now, with the Lisbon Treaty, what happens is that this person should be, this kind of EU Prime Minister, should be elected by the European Parliament. So that's very important. So what happens is that the member states will propose a candidate, taking into account the results of the elections, and then this candidate will have to look for majority in the hemicycle, in the European Parliament to get elected.
So
That's
just to clarify a little bit, you see, is that the system which is the same in every member state, or are there any specifications for the member states? How is that arranged?
Well, for the member states, nothing changes. For European elections, there are certain principles that are at European level, but then the shape of every election in each member state is different, and this is subject to national law. So elections will be a bit different, the system will be a bit different from Slovenia to France, UK, etc.
For the MEPs, I guess.
For the MEPs, so
Yes.
to elect the parliament, to elect the
Okay.
members of the parliament.
Okay. So the party which gets the most votes in the member state will be able to propose a candidate, or it is the government which proposes the candidate?
So the
We
candidate,
have to know that, we have to
yes,
explain, I think.
Indeed. I mean, after the elections, what happened is that the member states will have to propose a candidate. That's a proposal.
The government of the member state.
Exactly. The different governments will sit together and think, okay, who should be our candidate? And in this proposal, they should take into account the results of the elections. And then, formally, this candidate has to be elected by the parliament by the majority of the component members,
Yes.
which means 376 members out of 751. So that's why, as well, if you want the candidate of the member states to go through, he will have to find a majority, which means that, in fact, we'll see after the elections a lot of consultations to see who can build a coalition in the parliament to get elected.
Okay.
And very important as well, for the sake of transparency of the whole process, we have already the European political parties, the main ones at least, that decided to put forward some candidates for the job of Commission President.
Yes, they have, on the
Exactly.
European level.
Exactly,
Yes.
which means that...
And who are the candidates, just to...
which means just as a voter, you vote for your national MEP,
Yes.
but then you know that this person will then vote for this or this person for the presidency of the commission. And now we already have some candidates,
Yes,
of course.
who are they? Maybe we can tell them.
We have, if we take them in the chronological order, we had first Mr. Tsipras
Yes.
for the left.
Yes.
Who was
is he
appointed, he's from Greece.
Greece?
He was appointed by the left as the 15th of December.
Okay, that was quite early. I mean, he was first, I guess.
Yes, he was first to be like formally candidate, because we also have Mr. Schulz, Martin
Okay,
Schulz, German
yes.
Martin Schulz, who's now president of the European Parliament, who will be the candidate for the Socialists, who declared himself candidate even before Mr. Tsipras was appointed, but
Okay.
still he will be formally appointed
to
as
follow.
candidate later on.
Okay.
We have the Greens, quite interesting case where
Yes.
we had some primaries, so the voters could choose a candidate. There were 4 candidates for the Greens, so 2 of them
Really?
have been chosen as top candidates, so French José Bové and German Ska Keller.
Okay.
So for the Greens that we have. For the People's Party, which is the main party in the parliament so
Yes,
far,
yes.
we don't have any names.
Not
There are
yet.
a lot of not
Any
yet.
guessings?
I won't guess,
Disclose, yes.
but of course there are many names circulating. It's then
Okay.
up to the party to decide, and that will be done normally beginning of March. We should know it.
yes.
So there are already a few names circulating, and there is kind of
Speculations,
already a first
heating up.
exactly internal campaign.
Debate,
So
okay.
That's going to
Yes.
be pretty interesting to see what happens there. Yes.
That's excellent. So, for example, I would like to be as for the Slovenian voter.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Slovenian voter is aware of these candidates, or they will be more prone to choose among the candidates that will be proposed by the government?
I think
National government, I
Of
mean.
course, the national context does always play a role in European elections as well.
Especially in, let's say, in
Yes.
Slovenia, its main news, European news are not really so much, how would I say, publicized as national news.
Yes. There will be a kind of 2 levels in the campaign. One is like more with the person you're voting for, which is, your MEPs or the people, the Slovene candidates, for example, will campaign in Slovenia. But the second level will be the pan-European dimension, where you're going to have these different candidates that we
Yes.
just mentioned. We also forgot Mr. Verhofstadt from the Liberals, who is
Yes.
also a candidate. So we're going to have these 2 levels, and we see maybe voters, they start to be aware of it. There is still more and more media attention on this kind of presidential race that we're going to have. But of course, it's still pretty early. So elections are in end of May, 22nd to 25th of May. That means we still have quite some time. And in the last weeks before the elections, we can expect it, the volume of information to be bigger and bigger.
All right, that is certainly an interesting point, because European Union has this democratic deficit, and one of the reasons sometimes mentioned by some scholars is that there is no competition for the main political position. So this might help. What do you expect? What about the turnout? Do you have plan A, plan B? What are your expectations? I mean,
it's very difficult to say now what the turnout will be, but I think for the first time, and that's very interesting, we have this presidential race. We have a different context with the crisis, so people are becoming aware that there is something at stake, that they have to find solution together in Europe, which doesn't mean that they should go one direction or the other, but that really means they should. This election matters for the first time, so that's a pretty big difference.
How would you explain people why these elections matter more than the one before? Because, as you know, the trend, unfortunately, is the decrease of the turnout. Yeah?
The powers of the European Parliament have grown up in the past years and decades. So now the Parliament is, as we say, a fully co-legislator. So it is deciding on almost everything on equal footing with the Council, which means with the Member States. So you have this kind of two-chamber system in the European Union. One is the European Parliament, the other one is a council where the ministers of the different countries meet. And then you have the Commission, which is more the executive, which is kind of a government proposing the laws and then putting them into reality. For the turnout, it was the main topic of discussion in the previous elections. It's changing now because we have this presidential race. So it's not only about are people going to go and vote, but it's what will be the choice. That's very important.
Yes.
And we had a turnout of 43% in last elections in 2009. This year we don't know. But if we compare, for example, to the US, it's pretty interesting that in the US, nobody will talk of a democratic deficit.
Deficit, yes.
Or problem of legitimacy.
Yes.
And if you look at the turnout in the 2010 midterm elections, turnout was 41%. And of course, we always turn to the European Union and say, okay, turnout is decreasing, that's a big problem. That's not only a European problem or European Union problem, that's the same trend. Also in all national...
It seems like a trend, yes. It seems that people are choosing different ways how to introduce their will into the legislation.
Yes. And of course, I mean, turnout will depend on many factors and also on the political campaigns that we're going to have. So it depends on the choices offered to voters.
What is the campaign? How are you going to convince the voters to come and vote and make a good choice?
I would say first, this is mainly a job of political parties, of politicians, of candidates to convince voters to go and vote for their ideas, for their vision for Europe. But of course there are different things. I'm working in the European Parliament, so in the administration. So as an institution, we also have a duty to inform citizens.
Yes.
Not to inform them about what is good, what is bad, what should be decided for them, but to inform them about the powers of the Parliament, about how election works and when do the elections take place. That's very important. So our job as an institution is really to make people aware of the date of the elections. Whether they then turn out to vote or not is rather a matter of political debate and then personal choice at the end of the day.
So, well, if I may ask, you see, if one of the main tasks of the European Parliament as an institution is to inform about the date, but then, on the other hand, there are considerable amount of resources and money spent for the campaign. You do have some kind of communication campaign, though I wonder whether, or sometimes there are questions, what is the best way to disseminate information? Is it information system, communication system? What is the best way? So you do also have this communication campaigns.
Yes.
And this year, I believe, you outsourced the campaign. You usually outsource this to the agency. Yes, which prepares the strategy. Which was this year's agency?
So there was, yes, indeed, an open call for tender for some agencies to help Parliament communicating and doing this information campaign, which is an information campaign that builds a framework in which you have all the other campaigns, political campaigns by parties and candidates that can develop. So it's about explaining the powers of the Parliament.
Whom did you choose? Do you know? It's British or?
It's an international agency who won the contract. It's Ogilvy, the name of the agency, and there is a campaign now with different means. So strategy was also done a lot within the institution, within the Parliament, because of course that's politically sensitive.
And what kind of strategy have they suggested?
The idea was really to emphasize power of the Parliament, and emphasizing the power of the Parliament is also emphasizing the power of people. It was really to tell them and to tell to people that they can make a difference, they can express their choices, and that will make a difference at the end of the day, at the end of the year. So they can choose the direction of Europe for the next 5 years.
Okay, and in what tools do they use? How do they try to convince them?
There are different parts of this campaign, of course. We have a big part which is about informing citizens, but also journalists European Union, 500 million citizens, that's huge. So with a very little budget compared to that, you cannot reach every person. So you really have to work together with journalists to help them in the work of informing. So it's a lot about giving some support, technical support to them to report about elections.
Infrastructure for journalists. That is very well provided. As a journalist, I can confirm that. Really, we are very pleased, especially journalists from the smaller media, yes, to have this assistance. It's really important for us. Yes.
Indeed, and with the crisis of the press as well, it's very difficult for
media. I really I think it's a money well spent actually. No? And sometimes I even think that perhaps I couldn't say in general for the rest of the Europe, but like my experience so far was that smaller media houses, they even pay more attention to present objective and truthful information in comparison, let's say, in maybe also in our countries where there is an editorial policy which sets sometimes the limits. So I can confirm for this media support, also from the European Commission. I think this European Journalist Center is also doing a great job inviting journalists over, presenting and offering them some support. Yes, so this is nice. This I enjoy as a journalist. Yes, but I would like to know about Ogilvy.
Ogilvy, yes.
Yeah. How do they prepare campaign? Do they present any research information? I'm sure that our viewers would like to understand how it really works.
There are different steps in preparing a campaign, of course. First one is you have to set the objectives. Once you have it, you have to...
So what would be the objectives?
What I said was raising awareness on Parliament's power, raising awareness on the date of the elections, and then you can also have different phases in the campaign. So the closer you get to the elections, the more the message will focus on the date of the elections. And if you're like 6 months before, then you focus a bit more on the powers of the Parliament to explain why it will then matter to go and vote.
Do we have any material? Have you might brought anything that we can show? Because it would be nice to see what does this election campaign now looks. What is the result of their research and these proposals? What is the slogan this year?
The slogan is there are different things. You have a visual identity, so which is more a logo, which said act, react, impact, so that we used ahead of the elections. It's kind of a signature for the Parliament to say really through Parliament we empower people. People have the power to act, to react to what happens and make an impact at the end of the day. But then the more we move closer to the elections, the more we're going to have as a message, this time it's different. To explain why the elections are different, it's what I said at the beginning.
Of the system,
yes. Exactly.
You're going to have, what are you going to have, how are you going to explain this? I mean, you said we are going to explain it's a different system. Do you use certain tools in the campaign to explain that?
There are different things. There are, as I said, relations with journalists to explain what are the differences. We have a lot of things on the internet, social media, etc. Some applications.
You open a special website now.
There is exactly. There is a special elections website, elections2014.eu, where you can find all the information about all, links to the European political parties. Some data sheets about the member states to know, what are different indicators in different member states. You have a whole press kit, which makes also a summary of the past legislature, what has been decided, etc. What could be the issues at stake in the next legislature. So it's a pretty complete website.
And so this is the second stage to explain why it's important to go. What is the system? Why are these elections different than the previous? And then you said there are more steps. That's another step.
Then we'll move towards also more message. That is, you decide who is in charge. Meaning people will decide who they want to send to the European Parliament, because they will be in charge of voting EU legislation, but they will also indirectly decide who is in charge of the European executive, so who will be the president of the Commission. So that's very important. And also when it comes to the members of the Commissions, so to the commissioners, which are kind of the ministers in with different portfolios, this Commission, these commissioners will have to be approved by the European Parliament. So the results of the elections will also...
But that was already before.
That was already the case before. That point was already before, but now what we have is that we have the whole legitimacy of the executive with the election of its president, with the approval of the entire Commission that is reinforced.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me check what is... We still have... Yes, we still have some time. That's great. I'm glad. We could discuss now, let's say, the previous campaign. Yes. The turnout of the voters was 43%. That was the lowest turnout so far. I mean, yes, because it's the decreasing trend for various reasons. And I would like to say something about the reasons, the assessment of this campaign. I mean, what did the numbers show? What was the public opinion? Why people didn't come? Why didn't approach these elections more?
It's quite interesting because we have this figure of 43% that indeed has been the lowest since Parliament is elected directly for 30 years, 35 years now, at the moment we speak. But we have very, very big differences among member states. You have some member states where voting is compulsory, so of course the turnout is about 90, 95, 97%.
Well, Luxembourg, Cyprus, Belgium.
And there are some other countries where the turnout is extremely low, especially that was the case in new member states. I mean, what we call the new member states, so the whole enlargement from 2004, exactly, and then 2007, as the 10 plus 2 countries. So yes, we have big differences. There is, of course, different explanation for each of the countries, depending on the context, etc., etc.
Okay, could you? I mean, did you also assess the campaign, the previous campaign? Did you, I mean, how would you verbalize these reasons, let's say?
The previous campaign was already a turning point in terms of institutional campaign, because for the first time, what we put at the center was the notion of choice. People have the choice, you know, the slogan was "It's your choice."
Yes.
But then back this time 5 years ago, then the choice was a lot about policies. You know, what do you choose in economic terms? What do you choose, like migration policy? Do you want this or that? Now we move toward a choice not only of topics or policies, but also of people.
Okay. So because you see, democratic deficit is exactly about the lack of influence that people feel they have on the making and also implementation of the European policies.
But that's very interesting, that's exactly where the gap is. The gap is not between the European Union and the citizens, the gap is between the perception people have of the European Union and the reality. And that's why it's very important to communicate, to inform about how things are happening. Now, when decision is taken at European level, people may say, it was imposed to us. But in fact, the decision has to be taken together by the European Parliament and the Council, meaning that you have the member states that decide, so they cannot say it was imposed because that was decided by them as well, and by the European Parliament, which is directly elected every 5 years.
Well, I would like to discuss more about this to communicate, yes? Because in fact, there is the European public sphere is in making. It does not really exist as such. And on top of that, if it is in the making and it's not quite there, it's very divided. It's very different because people who don't have the same tradition, don't share the language, don't share the beliefs, like it's a big variation among nations of European Union. It's very difficult for them to discuss the same topic at the same time, in the same context as Habermas has put it, or perhaps even at the European Commission think that is some sort of a broad definition of the European public sphere. Now we have all these various national spheres which are more or less occupied with national policies and politicians and topics. So how do you connect all this? What is the fil rouge or something like that that would connect these various national? How would you communicate with citizens of Europe? I mean, one point is to choose the they will have an influence of to choose the highest official in EU. But some people wouldn't know anything about that candidate. Well, then maybe more, because the let's say German candidate will have obviously more people who would be familiar with the German candidate. So obviously somehow the German candidate will prevail. You see, how would you deal with these differences? For example, Slovenia, we are 2 million people. How is possible that our candidate could prevail? Maybe except Commissioner Potočnik, who is already a commissioner and he's quite known in his field.
I think if you want to have this European public sphere that we don't have yet, that's in making indeed. You first need to bring European questions and debate into the national public spheres. That's the first step. And once you have it, then you can open up a bit the borders and discuss at pan-European level. Of course, you have the two levels, so you will always have them. What we have now, and which is, I think, a great asset, and this making of a new European public sphere, are social media, and the way the internet is developing. I will take a very concrete example.
Yes.
The European Parliament is on social media, has been on social media for 5 years now, and has developed a central Facebook page, which is in English.
Yes.
Which has now more than 1 million citizens, 1.2 million people that are debating every day on different matters related to the EU. That's great, because there you really have people from different nationalities, different backgrounds that can discuss together.
Okay, so social media is one answer to this,
yes.
To establish European, and the lingua franca would be English, I guess.
Yes, of course. I mean, not everybody speaks English, so that's why you need to have the possibility for people to discuss in their own languages. That's why Parliament has also the strategy of decentralized communication with information offices in each member state. And for example, when we talk about Facebook again, you have each information office that has also an own Facebook page, where the community is of course smaller, because that's restricted to a certain country, certain languages, but where you can discuss and debate in your own language.
That's interesting. We are approaching towards the end now. I would be very interested to find out a little bit about the relation between DG Com in the European Commission. This is a very specific question, but I guess everybody could say, well, this is completely European Parliament's affair to promote European elections. But I think now with interinstitutional sort of connections, I think that the change in communication strategy started since 2004 even, I think. It's much more emphasized. No? Yeah. What is that relation? How much influence do they have? How much do you have to fit into their strategy field?
Of course, we're talking about European elections and not only European Parliament elections. So these elections will matter also for other institutions, such as the Commission, that will get some legitimacy out of this.
Okay.
And of course, you have the different communication departments that also work together. When it comes to the elections, the Parliament has kind of the lead to shape a campaign. But of course, the Commission, we're working with them, regularly meeting them to see how we can complement each other, how we can find synergies, and to be also sure that the budgets are used in the best possible way.
I see, because you see at the European Commission, their strategy, as I did assessment of it, is it uses more of the persuasive models, marketing models, models that are also used for selling, even cars, soap, whatever. And I don't know how does that work in the political environment, especially for these elections.
Yeah, you always have different aspects. You have a part which is more about information and a part which is a bit more about branding and being visible. I think that's the part you're referring to. I think both do complement each other.
Is that efficient? How do you assess that? I mean, is that approach, marketing approach, persuasive models, do you think they reach the goals? I mean, the goals because the European Commission has set the goals, in establishing, or there is a room for the improvement. I mean, where do you think we should go? Which direction? More into marketing or more into the information? Just giving transparent, newsworthy information to the public.
No, of course, information is the basics. It's something you need to have. It's just you give the information to journalists, to the public. So there's another part about more communication. But I think the way we should and we will go in the future is toward a more political model of communication, meaning that what we see now in shaping is a new model and perception of Europe, which is a political body, political organs, rather than just an administrative.
Political integration has been sort of not a set, it may be even a priority, but certainly a wish since the 80s. And so far, the process is rather slow, no?
Yes, but what you have in the Commission, they also have a pretty different view because they are representing the unions, they are a government. In the Parliament, what we feature a lot is debate, is controversy. So of course, and the way you will communicate about it is slightly different, but that's complementary, of course.
So in the Parliament, it's very important to have this communication with citizens, actually, through their representatives, even more than for the Commission, I would imagine.
It's key to the Parliament to have a very good, sustained communication and information policy, and that's the way we're trying to go.
And the offices of EP in the member states, they are people who are working for this communication. They are so-called street-level bureaucrats. Yes. How do you assess their work every so often? Do you measure their?
Of course, yes. So there are a lot of measurements, and everything we do in communication, we try to measure to see if it's efficient. To ask ourselves the question: how could we do it better? Next time, maybe we shouldn't do it because that was not efficient enough, and maybe another project was very efficient, so we should do more. So it's an iterative process where we also exchange a lot of information between Brussels, between the member states.
Do you have maybe just I'm not sure whether you have these numbers here, but perhaps which country has the most effective office?
So it's difficult to say.
Of the EP, I mean.
So I don't know. We have also different offices because, of course, depending on the size of the member states, we have big offices in big countries, smaller offices in smaller countries.
Or any examples of good practice?
We had, for example, very nice experiment in the last months with a series of events done in member states to debate big topics ahead of the elections, so-called react events. So inviting people to react with always some guest speakers. So there was one on economy, one on jobs, all the big topics, role of the EU in the world. No, that was more like 3 speakers and with the public, some 100 people.
Live events?
Yes, live events, also web stream, etc.
So web is a powerful tool at the moment.
People can interact, can discuss, can debate. And yes, that was very successful.
Well, I'm glad to hear that this information is slowly disseminating among the citizens. How about media? I mean, except that you are enhancing the work with them. Are they going to be given any before the elections? Do you have any plans, extra actions for them, or?
Well, there will be this ongoing support, and of course we have bigger support just ahead of the elections. What is interesting when it comes to media is to see how they cover the elections in qualitative and quantitative terms. If we compare to 2009, the coverage has started much earlier, and when we see the coverage as well, there was an increase of about 80% in September of the coverage of EU elections. And then again, the level was sustained, and then there was another increase of about 60% in the coverage in January. So there is a huge increase.
Which events happened at that time? In September was the launch of the campaign, I guess.
Yes, September was the launch of the campaign.
And January was...
And January is more the political process that is at work, that is
what
getting
provoked
interest.
that event?
That's always difficult to say, but I would say we entered 2014, so the year of the elections, so of course it does raise attention. And then you also had these debates about these big candidates for the countries. And in quantitative terms, media do cover a lot this electoral race between the presidential candidates, so that's very interesting and very good coverage, yes. So we could be quite confident that the coverage will continue to increase, and that will help people to get information.
Higher turnout than in the previous elections. That's your wish. What is 50%? Is it the...
We don't have any goal. Our wish is to say that everybody, or almost everybody in the Union, in the European Union, knows what's going on, when the elections are, and what is at stake.
All right.
Whether they go to vote, it's their personal decision, depends on the political campaign and the political alternatives that are offered to the voters.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this conversation. I'm sure we presented some information that will be useful for our viewers that was useful, and it is useful to hear. We will continue in 5 or 10 minutes with another guest. We're going to talk about Ukraine. And thank you very much for coming. And I cross my fingers for the big turnout at the next elections.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.